This afternoon, we'll be releasing findings from the 2025 Corruption Perception Index that was released this morning by Transparency International. And as you all may be aware, in Liberia, CENTAL is the national chapter for Transparency International. And so we are releasing this report on behalf of Transparency International, with more emphasis on Liberia and the efforts being made to fight against corruption. At this juncture, it is my distinguished honor to invite our Executive Director, Anansi Dinyame, who will read the statement.
Thank you, Edward. A very warm welcome to our media colleagues and partners. As Edward indicated, we called you to release the 2025 edition of the much discussed Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International. We do the statement and entertain questions if there are any. First statement for immediate release. Liberia makes marginal progress in 2025 Corruption Perception Report, Index Report. Moves 1 point up the ladder, highlighting need for drastic reforms to significantly improve performance. Monrovia, Tuesday, February 10, 2026. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the press, the Center for Transparency and Accountability in Liberia, CENTAL, is pleased to release findings from the 31st edition of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, which is the 2025 edition, with a focus on how corruption is undermining global, regional, and national democracies. Since 1995, the Corruption Perception Index scores and ranks countries and regions based on how corrupt their public sectors are perceived. The score ranges from 0 to 100, where 0 is considered as the perceived most corrupt country, and countries at 100 are perceived to be the most clean countries. This year, 182 countries were targeted. The 2025 CPR draws upon 13 credible data sources which capture the assessment of experts and business executives on a number of corrupt behaviors in the public sector. These corrupt practices and behaviors include bribery, diversion of public funds and supplies, use of public office for private gain, procurement irregularities, state capture, and nepotism in civil service. Also, some of the sources assess mechanisms available to prevent and address corruption in the country. Examples include government's ability to enforce integrity mechanisms, financial, logistical, and moral support to anti-graft institutions, independence and viability of anti-graft institutions, the effective prosecution of corruption, of corrupt officials and others accused of corruption, conflict of interest prevention, access to information, freedom of speech in the media, and legal protection for human rights defenders and anti-corruption campaigners, whistleblowers, witnesses, journalists, and investigators. Liberia score and performance. In the previous report, Liberia scored 27 over 100, which at the time represented a 2-point improvement on the CPR. In the latest report, Liberia is now ranked 136 out of 182 countries covered by the 2025 report, with a score of 28 over 100, which represents 1-point improvement. This goes to say, for the second time in 2 years, Liberia moved 1 point up the CPR ladder, from a score of 27 in 2024 to 28 in 2025. Despite the fact that this latest ranking shows marginal progress in the new administration's anti-corruption efforts, government needs to do more as the country has maintained its status as one of the biggest global decliners since 2012, declining by 13 points, 9 points under former President Sirleaf, and 7 points under the George Weah's administration. Despite the marginal progress, CENTAL is deeply concerned over Liberia's consistent overall poor performance, especially her place amongst the worst decliners. We acknowledge this year's 1 point increment or increase under the Bakar-led administration, which builds upon the 2 point increment in 2024. It shows marginal progress. However, we caution against any form of complacency as impunity for corruption still remains high. Public integrity institutions are still underfunded. The impact of the asset declaration process still unconvincing, and several sanctioned former officials and others who acquired illicit work yet to be fully investigated and prosecuted. More so, the recent arbitrary appointment at the Independent National Commission on Human Rights, contrary to the required transparent, inclusive, and competitive process, somehow undermines the rule of law. Regional highlights and trends. On the regional front, the report found that sub-Saharan Africa's systemic corruption is severely undermining democracy, the civil space, press freedom, and other accountability efforts. The sub-Saharan Africa average is 32, the lowest in the world. The highest scoring countries in the region are Seychelles 68, Cape Verde 62, Botswana 58, and Rwanda 57. Notable improvements include Cote d'Ivoire 43, Seychelles 72, and Tanzania 40. The sharpest decliners were seen in Lesotho, Eswina, and Liberia, which declined by 13 points from 41 in 2012 to 28 in 2025. Global highlights. The CPI ranks 182 countries and territories by their perceived levels of public sector corruption on a scale of 0 to 100. The global average stands at 42 out of 100, its lowest level in more than a decade, pointing to a concerning downward trend that will need to be monitored over time. The highest scoring region is Western Europe and the European Union, with an average score of 64. The lowest scoring region is Sub-Saharan Africa, with an average of 32. The 32 average score of Sub-Saharan Africa shows on any worrisome picture of the action against corruption in the region, as governments are doing very little to safeguard democracy and match their fine promises with tangible actions to end the culture of impunity for corruption and bad governance. The vast majority of countries are failing to keep corruption under control. More than two-thirds, 122 out of 180 score under 50 for the 8th year in a row. Denmark obtains the highest score at 89, closely followed by Finland 88 and Singapore 84. Countries with the lowest scores and high levels of instability like South Sudan with a score of 9, Somalia 9, and Venezuela 10. Since 2012, 50 countries have seen their scores significantly decline in the index. Those who dropped the most include Turkey 31, Hungary 40, and Nigeria. Meanwhile, the biggest improvers were Estonia 76, South Korea 63, and Seychelles 68. Although no country is free of corruption, countries tapping the CPI have full democracies and share characteristics of open government, press freedom, strong parliament or legislature, civil liberties, and independent judiciary. Meanwhile, countries at the bottom are characterized by widespread impunity for corruption, poor governance, weak parliament and oversight bodies, poorly supported and underperforming anti-graft institutions, among others. Recommendations. The marginal progress noted, but more decisive actions are needed to relieve or to realize significant improvement on the CPI and other key governance indicators in Liberia. The 1-point increment in 2025 compared to 2-point increment in 2024 gives an indication that President Boakai reduced his anti-corruption speed instead of accelerating and being revolutionary to achieve greater impact. Government must be more intentional about any impunity for corruption and improving governance by ensuring greater oversight and accountability of state-owned enterprises, evidence-based allocation and transparent use of the national budget and other public resources, establishment of the specialized anti-corruption code, adequately financing and demanding improved performance from anti-graft institutions, addressing impunity and other abuses in the judiciary, strengthening legislative accountability and oversight, and ensuring greater transparency and meaningful civil society and citizens' participation in the governance process. Finally, we applaud civil society, citizens, journalists, activists, and other groups and individuals who have been vocal against corruption and bad governance in Liberia, especially over the last few years. We encourage more demands for transparency and accountability from government, especially from President Joseph Boakai, Speaker Richard Kuhn, Senate Pro Tem Youngly Kanga Lawrence, and the Chief Justice Nyame Gbese, who have the greatest collective responsibility to shape the country's anti-corruption effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you have your question or questions, you may raise your hand and you will be recognized. Any questions? Yes, sir. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Professor Kaman. I work for Fukiekum. Based on what you just read, which part of the government would you think that influence the increase or the decline in corruption?
The relative improvement. We're looking at the government in general. This report does not point to any particular government institution. There are other reports that Transparency International produces that look at specific government sectors. For example, the police, the judiciary, the legislature, the executive, and all of that. This report is holistic in terms of grading the government's performance when it comes to dealing with corruption. So we don't want to input anything that is not necessarily a part of the framework or the methodology of the report. We deal with it as such. At other times, when we're talking about other matters, we can then look at the specifics in terms of which government institution is responsible for certain actions on that.
So finally, too, how you mentioned of schools of other issues, the access declaration and other things, and then with this kind of report, are you surprised with this 1%?
So 1% is improvement as much as it is marginal and negligible, to be frank, because we talked about being at 41 in 2012 and being at 28 right now. So it means that imagine since 2012 we've been declining. Right now we're amongst the worst decliners worldwide. As much as under this administration, we started to go up. So over the last 2 years, we've improved by 3 points. But other countries have improved far more than that. So the point is we need to do more. 1 point addition is recognized, is acknowledged, but it doesn't represent the kind of reform that we need. If the government is revolutionary in its actions, if the president is more robust in his action as the head of the country, if we're seeing more from the legislature in terms of transparency around their processes and decision making, if we're seeing more from the judiciary in terms of reforms, tangible, verifiable reforms that can lead to a more transparent and integrity-based judiciary, we will achieve far more than what we've seen. It's possible to achieve 10 points increment over a year's period, but that is just 1 point, and we made a point that the first year of the Waka administration, we achieved 2 points increment, or 2 point increment. This year is 1. So it means that the president reduced his speed. And we're saying the president because he has the country. But at the close of the statement, we said the Chief Justice, the President, the Speaker, Senate Pro Tem, all of them take collective responsibility in shaping the fight against corruption, like going in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy to hear that.
Go on.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
My name is Kabila. I work for Lila Global School. Then we have first game, right? CENTAL represents TI, that's what we mean by
Yeah.
Considering the kind of school we have had, it's been established in 1 point. How do you look at it?
The increasing by 1 point, not dropping. Yeah, but yeah, it means that the increment.
You have 3 points already. But the issue is,
yeah.
How do you see your own work? Liberia, in terms of advocating to get rid of corruption and minimize corruption? That's the first question. The second question is, in sub-Saharan Africa, we got the West, Ghana, including Liberia. How many points will Liberia need at least to last from being West Ghana?
So to the first question, we see our work as very important, just as the very important work that the media is doing. There are different aspects to the fight against corruption. Civil society can engage, civil society can advocate, we can produce research reports, we can hold meetings and different engagements to sensitize the public, and even build platforms for them to report corruption. We've been doing that. Yes, we could do more, but we've been doing that considerably. Some of the cases that LACC has been dealing with are cases that we found there today. So yes, while there's room for improvement, we have been working, not just in CENTAL, but other civil society organizations. The media has been a very key part of that process as well. That's one. So the second point regarding what can we do or what score we can get to be considered amongst the best performers. We were at 41 in 2012. At that time, we were setting up all the different frameworks to fight against corruption. They were thought that we were doing relatively well. Remember, this report is based on the views of experts. So it's not ordinary citizens. So people who know about governance, people who follow activities and processes in the country very closely are the ones that are the respondents to the different questions that inform this report. So for the one 2012, if we were doing well, we would have been at probably 60 or even 70 by now. So the point is, we have to get back to that 41 in 2012 to even talk about progressing and moving beyond. So the task of this government is to take our school to that 41 to even begin talking about the whole conversation around going beyond that and surpassing the global average, which is 42. So the global average is 42. Locally, in the region, is 32. So that's still sub-Saharan Africa. We're still below the global average. Then Liberia is also below the average in the region, which is even more concerning. 28 when you got 32. So all over, we're not doing well. We acknowledge the 1 point increment. We acknowledge the 3 points increment since this new government took over, but we need to do more collectively.
Let me ask the final.
In 2023, 2024, you put they said that you didn't send your report for 2025. That's why I just said that.
Oh no, so we do not produce this report. While we are part of Transparency International, this report is independently produced. So we have our own study that we control locally. The state of corruption report is different. What we are discussing here is not the state of corruption report that we oversee and produce independently. This report is done by Transparency International. The data sources are credible sources. We talked about 13 data sources. So institutions that are recognized globally, like the Mo Ibrahim Index, for example, that works around press freedom, the World Bank and these different institutions that do different analysis in terms of the governance process. There are different schools, are the schools that TR takes and put through a statistical process to come up with this report. So even though it says corruption perception, but it's not the usual perception in terms of going to field to administer questionnaire to say, look, citizens, what do you think, this person, what do you think? It is not that kind of study. The study that does that is the Global Corruption Barometer, which is different from this report. Thank you. Yeah, right.
So, Mr. Mama, my name is Louis Ter, and I read for the New Dawn newspaper. I'm concerned about the yardstick being used by TR. How do they derive at the conclusion that such country is worst decliner or this country is best performing? Who do they talk to? And even the people they talk to, how well are they informed about government processes?
I talked about credible data sources. This is important. You are all media people here. You've heard about the Mo Ibrahim Index that looks at how countries fare in terms of media, landscape, and all of that, press freedom, freedom of the press. That is a globally recognized framework. Okay. So for a research to form part of the data sources, it has to cover a number of countries because Liberia's score would be compared to Ghana and other countries. So a research that focuses on one country is not considered as part of the data sources for this exercise. I talked about the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and other countries that do in-country studies or analysis of the governance processes of different countries. And these analyses cover different countries. So these are the data sources, credible data sources. So people they talk to are experts. When IMF and all these people come here, they talk to experts. And the views, for example, media executives are part of those that people talk to produce this kind of report. Civil society actors who are experts on different things. Human rights campaigners, experts outside of government. Those are the people they talk to that are very informed about the happenings in a particular country, and because of that, their views are very keenly considered as part of the sources for this research.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all we have. See you next time.